For 40 years, the National Hot Rod Association has staged the biggest of all drag races, the U.S. Nationals. Calvin Rice won the first event in Great Bend, Kansas in 1955, and since then, the sport and its heritage have made incredible changes. For the next 60 minutes, you're invited to take a stroll down the quarter-mile memory lane through 4 decades of the greatest drag race in the world.
I've done it all at Indy.
The 1979 U.S. Nationals champion.
It's the biggest drag race in the world.
In your drag racing career, if you never win Indy, it's never complete.
It's just the race. It is the drag race.
It is the race to win. I think any racer will tell you that.
It's the one you all shoot at. That's the one that people remember you by.
It's a 1,000-acre ballpark with 1,000 cars there.
It's sort of like the World Series of drag racing.
It's like the Super Bowl.
The U.S. Nationals, for some reason, when you roll on the gate on that very first day, you get chills running down your spine like no other event because it's obviously the granddaddy of them all.
That's the biggest, baddest race in the world.
And Prudhomme smokes the tires, McEwen pulling ahead.
It's like an old friend kind of going back and visiting once a year.
That sounds like Indy to me.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Evans.
And I'm Dave McClelland.
Mac and I just tallied it up, and collectively, between the two of us, we have made 64 U.S. Nationals appearances.
And I've got about 5 years on you on that. In fact, in 1956, I was there when Calvin Rice made the first ever 9-second elapsed time run, and today they're running in the 4s.
My first U.S. Nationals was mid-60s, Don Prudhomme's first top fuel victory, and since then, speeds have risen over 100 miles an hour.
Well, Steve, in the next hour, you're going to get a chance to join us as we take a look back at 40 years of the U.S. Nationals.
From Kansas to Indiana, with a couple of stops in between.
Steve, there's no other race that evokes the emotion on both the spectator, the driver, the crew member as the U.S. Nationals. And it also paints a panorama of the evolution of today's drag racing car. From the vehicle you're looking at, that sleek, long machine with the big wings, back to the early days when they had the very short wheelbase and no wing at all, no downforce provided. These were the earliest days of top fuel racing, the transition years. You can see the difference between then and now, and it is substantial indeed.
Well, David, as dramatic as the top fuel dragster evolution is, what about the funny cars? They've gone from almost jalopy-looking creations to something out of Star Wars. Originally just converted stock cars, the rear axle relocated, that made them funny-looking, hence the name funny cars. But now they're anything but funny.
These cars with their fiberglass composite bodies developed out of an original stock body car, believe it or not, in its very earliest form. They had steel bodies with just a very minor amount of weight-saving devices. Now, they are highly exotic machines. Pro stock eliminator race cars of today got their birth as a stock-bodied car delivered from the factory.
Yeah, the evolution was much like the funny car, except NHRA's rules makers stepped in and said, hold it, that's enough. We've got to keep these street looking, and wow, do the fans love them.
Steve, while they retain their original body shape, these are highly sophisticated race cars. And what is developed with today's modern pro stock class is literally the closest category in competition in NHRA drag racing. And the U.S. Nationals has had some of the most memorable victories of them all. This sprawling facility, Indianapolis Raceway Park, the permanent home of the U.S. Nationals, but it didn't always look like this.
No, it didn't. And in this video, it will be interesting to kind of look in the background and notice how the park evolves much as the sport has. Park's Tower, dedicated in 1983. Little did we know, this was the forerunner of the stadium-style drag strips that have been built all over the country and are still under construction. Parks Tower, of course, dedicated to NHRA founder Wally Parks, his wife Barbara. They loved that moment, as we all did, Dave. Even the racers were saying, it's about time. Now we've got something to be proud of.
And pride is something that everyone has, because this is what it looked like back in 1955 when racers came from all over the country to participate in the first national event ever conducted. It wasn't called the U.S. Nationals then. It was just the plain old Nationals because there was only one race.
How did so many competitors all over the country hear about this big event? Well, through the pages of Hot Rod magazine, which everybody read, and Wally Parks, not coincidentally, was the editor of Hot Rod.
Well, the early races were conducted on very primitive facilities. We started out in Kansas on an airport runway, and it was a tremendous experience for all of us because it was all trial and error, and it was everybody's dedication and determination that made it happen.
And of course, back in the mid-1950s, airports, either abandoned or active, were the sites of drag races all over the United States. Great Bend, it had the distinction of having the very first race, but they had to wait 2 weeks for the final round to be decided when Calvin Rice took the win because it rained out.
In fact, the finals were held in Phoenix, Arizona because the finalists were from the western part of the United States, and you're right, Calvin Rice with a fuel-burning flathead was the first ever Nationals top eliminator.
And he started a tradition that is carried on until this day, receiving the accolades for the titles. Kansas City, Missouri. Steve, this was the first U.S. Nationals that I had the privilege of attending. It was on a racetrack down in the river bottoms alongside the Missouri River.
Were you announcing?
No, I wasn't. Just there with a guy running a dragster, and we had a great time.
Ingenuity in action was the battle cry, and you saw it all, from stripped-down bear rails like that to, how about the aircraft Allison engine car of Art Arfons, the Green Monster. And we started to see the first of the small block Chevy V8s. Remember, this was 1956, and they were starting to hit the track.
Oklahoma City was the home of the U.S. Nationals for the next 2 years, 1957 and 1958. They got a little creative in those days, too, not only with the cars, but with the video.
The fans today love the burnouts. Back then, the entire race was one big burnout. And the cars, Dave, were frightful. They were very difficult to control, and I don't believe nearly as safe as what we have today.
Detroit, Michigan. The next 2 years, 1959 and 1960, was the home base for the biggest drag race in the world, the U.S. Nationals. The cars becoming a little bit more exotic, and in those days, onboard cameras were also state-of-the-art. Look, a rear-engine dragster dating back to the 59 and 60 era.
Well, the flagman's days were numbered, and so were the days of multi-engine power plants. They would soon fade away.
Steve, by 1961, the Nationals had grown in size that it needed a permanent home, and it found it at Indianapolis Raceway Park. But the park, a far cry from what it is today.
But still, even in those days, it was a magnificent facility. In fact, it cost over $1 billion in the 60s. It had an oval and a road course, and the first tech inspection was so huge, they had to move it out of the racetrack into a shopping center over on Speedway Avenue.
Back in those days, Eddie Hill was just a youngster and had a twin-engine car.
We took our big old heavy twin-engine Pontiac there with our dual rear slicks, and that car was so heavy and had so much power, and the asphalt was fresh. Literally ripped up the asphalt and flipped it backwards. I actually dug out a divot of fresh asphalt, flipped it back when I ran that big old heavy car. And Buster took the divot, he put it back in there, tamped it down, and said, now don't run here anymore, run over there next time.
I watched it come from just a piece of asphalt and a tower to a big stadium type of deal, and it's just fantastic.
Steve, I remember those days very well because it was 1961 that I announced my first national event, the U.S. Nationals, and it has been my honor, privilege, and pleasure to have been there every year since that time.
1961 was one of the years of the now infamous Nitro ban, but a young man out of Atlanta, Georgia named Pete Robinson in a Dragmaster car with white wall slicks on the back won top eliminator over Tom McEwen. He would forever be known as Sneaky Pete Robinson.
Steve, one of the reasons why he was called Sneaky was back in those days he had a little hand jack in the car, could lever the rear wheels off the ground, got them spinning. When the flag was thrown, he'd drop it down on the ground. He was running 840s and nobody else was close. We, in fact, could not even announce his time until he had done it 2 or 3 times because everybody knew he had to be doing something wrong.
By 1963, the flag starter was sitting in the grandstands, and along came an electronic device called the Christmas tree. And the drag racers, for the most part, hated it. For a number of reasons. It had a few glitches occasionally. I think the big thing was you couldn't fault it. It was either red or it was green, and you couldn't buy a couple of beers and a cheap steak dinner the night before to get on its good side. But
Christmas tree may have cut down on the restaurant and bar business in Indianapolis, but it did pick up one thing, and that is red light. Because as the racers tried to adapt to this new starting system, a lot of them left the red light glowing on the tree. Of course, the same problem exists today.
With one major exception, now they have the pros start. And these days, stock cars are top fuel. You all had a 2.5 second long countdown. A lot of guys just couldn't wait, just couldn't be that patient. But there was one young man, a guy by the name of Bobby Vodnik, who figured out just how to massage that tree. He'd stand up in the starting line and tap his foot until he got it down perfect. And who was to be his victim in the final round of 1963 on gasoline, the last year of gas at Indy? None other than Don Garlits.
Steve, that's me announcing in 1963 as Don Garlits was unable to wait. Look how quick he was on the tree. Bobby Vodnik picked up the U.S. Nationals title, and I must admit, that's the last we ever heard of Bobby Vodnik.
Well, in 1965, another young man came to Indy, bringing a big West Coast reputation, Don the Snake Prudhomme, driving for Roland Leong. It was my first year at the U.S. Nationals, and I will never forget it, as the Snake beat Tommy Ivo for his first Nationals title.
Driving the Hawaiian dragster with Roland Leong as an owner and Keith Black tuning it, and we went in there and won the U.S. Nationals, which was, it was just the highlight of my career there. It was great.
Well, 1965 may have started a long career of U.S. Nationals victories and memorable moments for Don Prudhomme. Probably the one that I remember the most. He was involved in a race for the final in 1970 against Jim Nicole.
This footage was shot by ABC's Wide World of Sports, and to this day, they use it in every anniversary special. It is that dramatic.
Nicole and Prudhomme left the starting line together, but the incident occurred at the finish.
His clutch came out of his car right in the lights and cut his car in half, and he went over the guardrail, and I went spinning down at the end of the track, following his car, and I figured he had lost his life at that time. That had a big moment in my life.
There's no back section on it or nothing.
The emotions of Don Prudhomme, the year 1970, as he watched the car of Jim Nicole cut into. Nicole bounced over the guardrail. That's Roland Leong standing behind Don Prudhomme. The ironic thing is, Jim Nicole sat across from Steve and I at the winner's banquet the next night.
Don said at that time, well, he didn't know whether he wanted to continue racing or not, and I told him that I thought that if the shoe was on the opposite foot, that you'd want him to keep racing.
Well, Snake got over the emotions of that moment, and not only did he keep on racing, he moved into the funny car category, much to the dismay of everybody else in it, because he just dominated Mac. This was 1974. Billy Meyer was in the far lane, and this was Tuesday morning after a Monday Labor Day rainout, as I recall. Billy Meyer had set the national record earlier in the weekend, but you don't give a 19-year-old kid 24 hours to think about it, and Prudhomme 24 hours to get his act together.
This win in 1974 over Billy Meyer was the second in a row for the Snake as he made the move to funny car and made it pay off. His wife Lynn offering congratulations, and Bob Brandt, who was the crew chief in the glory days of Don Prudhomme when he was running the U.S. Army funny car.
In 1983, we thought 580s from funny cars was spectacular. Prudhomme in 1983 rewrote the record book as few ever have. A 5.63, the car in the far lane.
If I was back home and I heard this was going on here, I wouldn't believe it, but I'm driving the car, and I'm here to tell you the car's doing it. It's an incredible racetrack. It always has been here.
We fast forward to 1989. It's now the Skoal Bandit Pontiac, and Don Prudhomme pulled off one of those rare doubles. This was the last year he was in a funny car, Steve.
It was, Dave, and I think if you ask the Snake, he will tell you this was his favorite U.S. Nationals experience because he did it Snake style. He just ripped their throats out. This was the final round of the Big Bud Shootout. He was up against John Forrest in the days when you could beat Forrest, and the Snake consistently in the 5 teens.
We now move one day later to the U.S. Nationals weekend. It's one thing to win the race within a race and the big bonus bucks that come from Budweiser. But the U.S. Nationals title is what every drag racer wants to win. And Prudhomme did it in fine style. A 5:19, needless to say, a big payday weekend.
I think the drag racers feel the same way about Indianapolis as the IndyCar guys do about the 500, or perhaps the Winston car guys do about the Daytona 500. You know, it's a race you all want to win.
Well, 4 years later, another double would be pulled off by John Force. 1993, Force had never won Indianapolis in any way, shape, or form. He won the Big Bud Shootout, and his Castrol Oldsmobile just thumped him on Monday as well. This actually was the final of the Big Bud, Dave.
And it was the McDonald's Oldsmobile driven by Cruz Pedregon, who was coming off of that great 1992 season where he won the U.S. Nationals and won the Winston Championship, snatching it away from John Force. Was he going to take away the Big Bud Shootout? Not if Force could stop him, and he did, but only by inches, as John Force won the $50,000 bonus payout that came his way as the champion of the Big Bud Shootout. Then came the race that John Force had never won.
And that had been the subject of every TV show open for a half a dozen years. John, why can't you win Indy? It's like Earnhardt in Daytona. Well, I'll tell you, he took no prisoners. He had a single run because Kenji Okazaki could not start his car.
I guess Prudhomme kind of summed it up. I heard him say once, if you can go to Indy and win the funny car race and win the Bud Shootout at the same time, that was an accomplishment only a few have done, and we did it.
Another double was pulled in 1991. Jim White was driving for Roland Leong at the wheel of the Hawaiian Punch Dodge.
This is 1991 when we set the national speed record, then got thrown out for a body being illegal. Then coming back and resetting it again and winning both the Big Bud Shootout and the U.S. Nationals.
Sounds like to me they shouldn't make Roland mad, because look what he did to John Force. A big weekend for Roland and Jim White. A big weekend for this young man. The year 1989. Who is that, Steve?
That is Nicholas Morgan and his happy Papa Larry. What a fantastic weekend he had. The Pro Stock Challenge, which is now held in Englishtown in the 80s, the late 80s, was at Indianapolis as part of the U.S. Nationals, kind of like the Big Bud Shootout. And Warren Johnson will long remember the final round of that as well, because he came out on the short end of the stick this day. Larry Morgan was just knocking the tree down with reaction times.
As Morgan got the advantage off the starting line, his Castrol Oldsmobile was able to hold on for a car-length victory. That was the first leg of the double. Then the next day, he didn't have the lane choice. He got moved over to the opposite lane. But the results ended up exactly the same, as Bob Glidden was the opponent that fell to Larry Morgan in this run.
I won the Mr. Gasket Challenge and Indy and had my first boy the same year, like 2 weeks before Indy, and that's probably one of the best races we ever won. It's a neat place.
But let's give credit for the first double to Kenny Bernstein back in 1983. And this was when Bernstein really started to take command of the funny car class and would go on to win 4 championships. In the Big Bud Shootout final, he was up against Al Segrini, Dave.
And Steve, you can tell the difference in aerodynamics from 1983 to 1990s as Kenny Bernstein in his Ford Tempo car here in the Big Bud Shootout got the win. Now that was the first half of the first ever double at Indianapolis Raceway Park. Dale Armstrong and crew performing as well then as they do today. Now here is Bernstein again. This is one day later at the U.S. Nationals. The final round opponent here, Tommy Anderson.
Yes, the same Tom Anderson that in 1992 and 3 would wrench Al Hoffman to 300-mile-an-hour funny car speeds. He was a driver in 83 and a darn good one. The Alan Aronak and Jim Womack Lincoln Mercury car. Bernstein had his hands full here. Both cars all over the racetrack, but it was Bernstein and the double at Indy.
Of all the places to do that, the U.S. Nationals being what it is, what it meant to me and means to me, and all of us as competitors, it was a great thrill for us to accomplish that. And that's what I remember the most about Indy. It's being the biggest there is, the best.
And And little did we know in 1983 that Kenny Bernstein was going to go on to win 4 consecutive Winston championships. In 1986, with his funny car, he was the first to run over 270, and also the first to use a lock-up clutch. And boy, was Kenny excited about his chances in racing.
Right, that's it, that's it. Well, I knew it was good. I mean, I knew I got down here and I was just hollering in there. That's super. Armstrong, man, I'm gonna kiss you all over. Yes, sir.
Wasn't long, though, that Kenny Bernstein slid his frame inside of one of those little tubular chassis they call a top fuel dragster.
Actually did that in 1990 and found out the learning curve was pretty stiff, but in 1991, Kenny Bernstein, the Bud King, made the finals against Pat Austin in the Castrol car. Austin, many-time alcohol champion, first time ever in a dragster, and you saw what happened. He just misjudged the burnout a little bit and banged the blower, sending Kenny on a signal.
The Austin family had acquired the Castrol GTX dragster from the late Gary Ormsby's estate, and Pat Austin had done such an outstanding job in his debut performance until it came down to this disappointing moment. All he could do was sit on the guardrail and watch as Kenny Bernstein came to the starting line. The crewman in the back probably signified the emotion of the moment. They knew they had the race won, and that's all that counts.
You bet. That was Mike Cougar, who's been with Bernstein a long, long time. And then, to rub salt into the wound, Pat Austin looked on as Bernstein smokes the tires. He had given it away.
I think that you have a tendency sometimes to treat Indy differently than a regular race, which can get you in trouble also because of what Indy is. The prestige, the mystique of Indy makes you do things maybe sometimes you shouldn't.
We had a lean condition on the burnout and just caused it to backfire, and Kenny went up and smoked the tires, and I just felt like my heart fell out of my chest, and I actually felt that I was at a low point that I've never been to before, and I've never been there since. I hope to never return there again.
Well, that U.S. Nationals was a low point for a lot of us, especially Lee Beard. Not only the losing crew chief in that Top Fuel final, but he had just suffered the loss of his great friend and team owner, Gary Ormsby, from cancer. We still miss him, always will.
The U.S. Nationals has really been kind of a rocky road for me. A lot of things, a lot of different experiences. The announcement came that my former boss, Gary Ormsby, had passed away, and that particular weekend I was with Pat Austin, and we went to the final round, and that was a very difficult race for me.
Well, my most emotional U.S. Nationals came in 1978, the funny car final, Mac.
As you can hear me in the background calling the race on the PA, Tom McEwen raced his longtime friend and competitor, Don Prudhomme. But the emotion really built up to the McEwen side. He had just lost his son.
One of the last things he told me is he wanted me to go there and win the race for him, and so I was kind of on a mission, and it worked out really good. But it was a real emotional deal all weekend, and it's something that you don't forget about stuff like that.
In fact, it was so emotional, Prudhomme a heavy favorite. When McEwen won, and he did in that Corvette of the near lane, his crew, so ecstatic, they jumped in Don Prudhomme's truck and tried to drive it down to the end of the racetrack. There they were, absolute bedlam. At the far end of the racetrack, I didn't know if I could do the winner's interview. It's been tears in my eyes.
And there were tears in Don Prudhomme's eyes as well. Talk about emotion. Darrell Gwynn at the wheel at that time of his Coors Extra Gold car. This was 1989. His career definitely on the ascendancy in Top Fuel competition. But as we all know, in 1990, he made that fateful trip to England. The dreadful accident occurred, and Darrell Gwynn returned to the U.S. Nationals, this time at the controls of his wheelchair as Frank Hawley was driving the dragster.
Well, it was a big boost for me to come back to Indy, being a defending champ. And after all, my recovery came from all of my friends, and that's where all my friends were, and that's why I wanted to be there. It was one of the motivating things for me to get on with my life and to get out of the hospital and to just be around the people that I wanted to be around instead of being around, the hospital surroundings.
I will never forget, 11 a.m., Monday morning, Labor Day, the roar of the crowd as Darrell Gwynn wheeled out onto that starting line. They were quiet, though, for the Top Fuel final because Darrell's car with Frank Hawley in it made it all the way up against Joe Amato.
This was the finals of the U.S. Nationals in 1990. And as Darrell watched, Hawley was outdistanced by Joe Amato, bringing an end to the dreams of Darrell Gwynn, at least that day. There was a tremendous amount of emotion on the starting line as the crews exchanged congratulations or condolences. Tim Richards, who was at that era the crew chief for Joe Amato, over to chat with Darrell. Darrell headed back to the pits.
Listen in the background. The crowd still cheering Darrell Gwynn. His father, Jerry, his then fiancee, Lisa Hurst, now Mrs. Gwynn. What a fitting way to end the U.S. Nationals. And you know, Mac, a lot of bizarre stuff has happened at Indy. Let's take a look at some of these incidents. How about 1969, when Tom Neha actually, well, he had the race won against Bill Morgan. I'll let you watch what happened.
A handicap race, and Neha in the 57 Chevy wagon in the near lane, the big wagon on the far side trying to play catch-up. Watch.
But he forgets there's no breakout in the final round. Nails the binders, and around it comes Morgan.
Steve, that is a rule that didn't last very long. The no breakout in the final. Morgan just squeezing by to take the win. Another ironic moment, if you will, came when Don Garlits met Benny Osborne.
Well, he was supposed to meet Benny Osborne, but as the car was slowing down after the burnout, Don Garlits accidentally shut his motor off, and he got a farewell handshake from starter Buster Couch.
And Benny Osborne got the single for the early round win. That was 1969. Let's jump forward 20 years to 1988. Top Fuel final, Joe Amato and Gene Snow.
Gene Snow was in the near lane. He looked in a great position to win his first ever U.S. Nationals in Top Fuel. The man who was the father of the funny car at the U.S. Nationals, backing up, not a care in the world, just trying to get in the right mental frame of mind, concentrate on running his own race, pretend the other guy doesn't exist. All those things Top Fuel drivers tell you they can do and rarely can. The crew made all the necessary cockpit adjustments. Amato staged, Gene Snow staged. Who would be the Nationals champ? Well, were it not for a broken throttle cable, it should have been Gene Snow. That's what happened. The throttle cable fell off of the car. Amato, who had smoked the tires, got back in it and won, much to the delight of his crew.
As we saw a little bit earlier, the dejection on Pat Austin's face when he knew he just gave it away after he exploded the supercharger on the burnout. The same emotions going through Gene Snow's mind as that throttle cable let go. Nothing but raw fuel poured out of the motor. Nothing but smoke came off of Joe Amato's tires. But trust me, when you look in the record book, it has no asterisk beside the win of Joe Amato. The Wave was popular back in those days as well.
Yeah, well, you were in the tower whipping him. It was an embarrassment to the entire sport, Mac. Look at this. Billy Meyer will vaporize a funny car body for you. Unbelievable. And Meyer, who in his youth was a go-kart champion, found that experience highly valuable in this particular situation. Now you think, that car was junk. It couldn't run the rest of the U.S. Nationals. Well, it could if your good friend Kenny Bernstein loaned you a spare body and you grafted it on.
Steve, you and I both have seen numerous explosions of engines, of cars, but I don't ever recall seeing a funny car body disintegrate quite like that one did. And the amount of debris that Billy Meyer drove over, and there was no damage to the chassis. That's why he was able to put the body on and race against this man. That's Joe Pisano. He's out dodging his driver, Mike Dunn, as Billy Meyer came to the starting line with a borrowed Bud body from Kenny Bernstein.
The explosion happened in qualifying, so it was a real tribute to the entire crew that they got this thing together and made it to the finals. And it looked like Meyer was maybe going to win it when just something else went wrong.
And as we saw earlier, Mike Dunn was able to backpedal his way to a win. Meyer launched well off the starting line here in the car in the lane nearest the camera, but he was unable to complete the run as problems set in. Mike Dunn recovered, as every good driver tells you they can do, and drove on for the win.
If you're a younger fan and only know Dick LaHaye from, say, the 93-94 seasons as crew chief for Scott Coletta, let's go back to 1989 when Dick LaHaye as a driver made the final round up against Darrell Gwynn. LaHaye was in the near lane, pumping that brake, kind of like Gene Snow earlier. In fact, in the same lane, I'm going to be the U.S. Nationals winner. Well, maybe not.
Not to tip the hand, but Dick LaHaye broke right at the starting line. 6 bolts that held the supercharger pulley on, let go, and his car was without power right off the starting line. Darrell Gwynn streaked on for the victory in 1989, and Dick LaHaye fell victim to mechanical problems.
In '89, it looked like I was a shoe-in for a win, and we had 6 little bolts breaking the blower drive right at the step of the throttle, and that was kind of devastating. You know, well, you get so high, you know, trying to win races and so forth, and then you can be so low so quick, and that's part of drag racing.
Well, hot tempers are also part of the U.S. Nationals' emotional extremes. Here in 1981, let's watch Connie Coletta. Watch this build. The engine will not start. Connie is strapped in. He's a prisoner. David Pace is out there backing up from his burnout. Connie wants to race. They're trying to fix the problem. Just kind of watch here. You're going to see a man turn into Mount St. Helens. The seconds ticking away. About this time, Connie realizes, that's it. What an embarrassment. Get back. There's Scott Coletta, crew chief Ron Barrow. Getting ugly. David Pace. Well, Connie Coletta's not watching. He's going to show the team what they did wrong. Look, you do it like this. Pace would not have been much of an opponent for Coletta. Coletta knows that. For very good reasons, there's no audio from Connie Coletta.
Many memorable things. I mean, I've been going to Indy since 1962, I believe, was the first year that I raced at Indy. This goes back a long ways. A lot of memorable times, a lot of good events, a lot of good racing.
A lot of that good racing involved Connie Coletta and Shirley Muldowney. Talk about emotions, talk about a bitter rivalry. There was none better than Shirley and Connie at their best. And that, of course, was in the late 70s and early 80s.
I raced her a couple weeks ago and I give her 2 driving lessons, 2 of them, one right after the other.
In his wildest dreams. Connie said a lot of things. It's who goes over the finish line. As far as where I sit, that's what's most important, and it takes more than just a driver to pull that out. It takes a team. And, you know, when there's somebody over in that lane that you really want to dust off, that really has got it coming, you know, you just hope and pray that your guys did their job right, because they're the ones that pull it out for you. And they did their job right.
These two met up in 1982, the Top Fuel final. It was just what you would expect from 2 former teammates on the track and roommates off. This was more than just a car race. Now, Shirley had had a rather trouble-free U.S. Nationals. Connie, on the other hand, had blown up everything in his trailer, and his crew was out scavenging parts just to try to make the final round. Appear he did. This was one the fans in attendance won't soon forget. Connie's pre-race thoughts?
All right, lane choice isn't going to be that big a factor, is it?
I don't think so. The driving is, though.
Oh, yeah. Anytime you and this lady meet, it's a bit of a war.
Yes, it is. It's going to be a hell of a good drag race.
And you take great pride in trying to lead on her.
I wouldn't do that. Ladies before gentlemen, isn't it?
Never let it be said that Connie Coletta let a chance go by to throw a little dart at Shirley Muldowney. But the dart was thrown right back in his face in the race, as Shirley in 1982 took home the title.
It's nice to be able to sit here and talk about winning that race. I consider myself extremely fortunate. You know, and luck did not enter into winning the race. I still consider myself lucky to have won it. That is the one to win. I guess it's nice to be able to say you've done it.
getting so close to winning Indy and never winning it. You know, I can remember my mom had a bottle of champagne, and she says, "We're going to drink that when you win Indy." And I think she drank it without me. It sounds like it.
Rivalries thrived at Indianapolis Raceway Park, and none were better than those in the Pro Stock category. And it was everybody trying to beat the hometown hero, Bob Glidden.
It is close to home. We don't have to stay in a hotel or motel. But on the other hand, when you race close to home, you have a lot of other deterrences. Everyone in the Indianapolis and Whiteland area thinks I own the racetrack and comes to me to get free tickets.
In 1981, the final pitted Lee Shepard in the Chevrolet against the Ford of Bob Glidden. Bob had won this race in 1973, 74, 78, and 79. But in 1981, Chevrolet prevailed. Glidden fell back early in the race and could not challenge Lee Shepard and the Rare and Morrison team.
Well, we just had a little longer staging session than normal, and I went ahead and staged first, and Bob pulled in, and he was a little late, looked like.
I think he had a quicker lap start.
Yeah, he usually does.
The rivalry got more intense, if that's even possible, in 1983. Another big staging battle, and you thought that was only a product of the 90s. Forget about it. Staging battles have been going on since drag racing began.
And look who wore the big number 1 as Winston champion, Lee Shepard. Oh, they just sat there. And sat there. Look at the crowd in the background. Nobody moving. Not the cars, not the people. The starter's getting involved here. Buster Couch, he said, "Come on, guys." Shepard broke first.
As they headed down the racetrack, the Ford eking out a win. This was the last U.S. Nationals finals for Lee Shepard before his untimely death in a testing accident just a little bit later. But certainly, Shepard will be remembered as one of the great U.S. Nationals Pro Stock champions of all time.
You know, a lot of fans, I think, have this image in their head of Warren Johnson as being this cold, calculated, introverted engineer type. I can tell you I've never seen a driver any more excited in my life than WJ was Indy 84.
Johnson at the wheel of the Oldsmobile Cutlass was against Bob Glidden, the hometown boy. Lost it.
In '84, you know, that was special because that was my first Indy. It was Bob Glidden that I raced there. Beating Bob at any time is special. If you're going to win a race, no matter how important any other race is, you have to win Indy. Otherwise, you really, to win a championship without winning Indy is really almost like a hollow championship.
The battles continued. Warren Johnson and Bob Glidden. The cars updated as we went through the years. It was 1988 when Bob and WJ once again sat on the starting line at Indy in the U.S. Nationals, and that race was decided at the line. WJ redlighted. That was Rusty Glidden in the background giving his impression of a two-legged pogo stick.
Every win's a special win, but this is Indianapolis. This is the Super Bowl of racing. This is the big race for us.
Well, Bob's 9 U.S. Nationals victories make him the winningest driver. Well, right behind, though, is Don Garlits with 8. And we would be remiss in this video if we did not pay tribute to Don Garlits with his own little chapter here. What a man. He is Indy in many ways to a lot of fans.
And of course, Indianapolis Raceway Park has been the scene of some of the greatest triumphs and greatest memories that we have of Don Garlits. Here's a shot long before Indianapolis Raceway Park in the U.S. Nationals. Don Garlits, no face mask, a carbureted blower. In '62, he drove for Connie Coletta.
Oh, the first one was with my gas car. In fact, Don Garlits was driving it, and I think we go back to 1962, I would imagine, and around 180 miles an hour on a gallon of gasoline. That was sort of one of the first significant things I can remember about Indy.
And it was a milestone moment indeed, the first ever 180, and it was Don Garlits driving Connie Coletta's car for that sole purpose, because in the finals up against Jack Crispin, it was Don Garlits at the wheel of one of his fabled Swamp Rats, and it failed him this day as Jack Crispin won the race. This was 1962.
1963, love the shades, lady. Big Daddy again in the final. We touched on this earlier. He was over on the far side up against Bobby Vodnick, the 19-year-old kid, and Big left way too soon.
I know I runner-up there in 1962 and 1963 before I actually won in 1964. And believe it or not, 1964 was almost a runner-up. I was racing Jack Williams, and it was just inches separated the cars. But that was my first win, and it was a big one.
By Indy time 1967, it was a very frustrated Don Garlits. Most of the better cars were running in the 6-second elapsed time zone, not Big Daddy. He wasn't winning, he wasn't qualifying. He said, I'm going to grow this beard until I run in the 6s. He made it to the final in 67 against Californian James Warren.
Steve, as incredible as it may seem, with all the performance accomplishments that Don Garlits has had at the U.S. Nationals and at Indianapolis Raceway Park particularly, the thing that sticks out most in my mind, and I think most of the people who've been around in this sport for some time, is this beard incident. You always hearken back to Don Garlits and the beard shaving incident on the starting line.
This was the final. Garlits and Warren. Garlits not only wins, he runs his first ever 6-second elapsed time. And by now, you know what that meant. And Dave, I got caught flat-footed. I was working for ABC. We went right to the winner's circle where Garlits was supposed to go. From that point where he stopped, I was down there. The winner's circle was over behind a tower you couldn't see on your left. We didn't know he went to the starting line for a Gillette moment.
And look what happened on the starting line. Don Garlits, surrounded by fans, standing up on the front of his truck and shaving off the beard. 1968, final round, maybe a precursor of things to come. Steve Carboni and Don Garlits.
Steve Carboni in the Bob Kreitz car was over in the far lane. We're looking at Garlits here right now, that real spindly car. Carboni with the state-of-the-art car of the time, the full mag body, the whole 9 yards. In fact, that team, Carboni and Bob Kreitz, invented the burnout. They were the first to ever pour bleach down into the tires. It was called the bleach box for a long, long time. But this here, it was experience on Garlits' side. As good as Carboni was, he maybe wasn't quite ready for the master. Big was long gone with no tire smoke. Carboni loses traction. Big Daddy sliding the clutch when not everybody knew how to do that. But then we moved to another Garlits-Carboni matchup. That was in 1971. You remember this?
Steve, this is remembered by me and many others as the longest nitro burn down in history. The look of starter Buster Couch says it best. Get in the staging beams now. They finally did, and Steve Carboni upset Don Garlits on that day in 1971. Just 4 years later, it was a new opponent in the final round for Big Daddy Don Garlits, this time Shirley Muldowney. And it was Shirley's first ever Top Fuel final round appearance at the U.S. Nationals. Back in those days, they still did the dry hop burnouts with the Top Fuel dragsters. The cars were equipped with 2-speed transmissions. The drivers had a lot of work to do as they made their way down the racetrack. Considerably different than the Top Fuel dragsters of the mid-1990s. As everyone at Indianapolis Raceway Park watched on, Shirley hazed the tires off the starting line, fell behind, and Don Garlits defeated Shirley Muldowney in her first ever appearance in a Top Fuel final at the U.S. Nationals. Little did anyone know at that time what that race would start, that rivalry between Don and Shirley.
Shirley, you got to realize the pressure was really on her because here she's got further in drag racing right now than any woman ever has. I mean, you know, runner-up, you got to understand that that's a fantastic thing. This is the U.S. Nationals. Oh man, this was only the U.S. Nationals.
He almost seemed proud of Shirley that day. Well, in 1978, Garlits again in the Top Fuel final up against Rob Bruins in Argane's Markley car from Federal Way, Washington. Bruin was to become an NHRA Top Fuel champion, the only one who ever did it without ever winning a single race.
Again, proving the value of consistency throughout a season-long competition in the Winston Points Chase. The same holds true today as it did back in the 1970s. This was 1978 at Indianapolis Raceway Park as Rob Bruins staged against Don Garlits. In one of the closest races of the year, just a few feet separated the winner from the loser, 5.90, the winning time for Garlits as he won yet again at IRP.
The competition has just gotten fantastic. It's probably the best drag race that I've ever witnessed.
Well, he may have updated that opinion in 1984. After having been missing from the U.S. Nationals for 5 years, Garlits returned big time.
It would be 1984. I had been out of racing for a few years. We established the museum drag racing, and I wasn't running the circuit. And Art Malone came up here to the museum and wanted to go to Indy, and I didn't know that he meant with a car, but he did. And he bought an engine for us, and we took one of the cars out of the museum. Smart Brent 26, I think it was, 1981 car. We put the modern engine in. We went to Indianapolis, Garlits and Malone. And I'll tell you what, everybody had a laugh. Not the fans, but the racers. But they are two old dinosaurs, they said, with a car out of the museum. And we worked our way through the field and won the event against all odds. And we didn't back into it. We were running good. And we went on to win at Pomona, the World Finals. And it actually got me back into the sport. But that race, winning that race at Indy in 1984, two old guys that were actually retired in a car that was a museum piece, just had to do something for you. It made you feel good inside.
Well, Garlits went on to win the next 2 years at the U.S. Nationals, and both times his victim in the final round was the youngster from Garlits' home state, Darrell Gwynn. In fact, Dave, remember what he called Gwynn? The Wolf, because he's hungry.
And hungry he was, but not enough to take a bite out of Garlits on this day. Don Garlits went on to win yet another U.S. Nationals title, this one number 7. And an incredible strength. Garlits practically had made the U.S. Nationals his own personal stomping ground. He stomped on everybody that came up alongside of him. And this time it was Darrell Gwynn that felt the heat. Art Malone with a smile on his face.
Darrell and I are the dearest of friends. And of course, I'm smart enough to realize I'm not going to be doing this forever, and Darrell's going to be doing it a lot longer than I am. I'll tell you, he is a young comer.
And a young comer he was in 1986. It was Darrell Gwynn once again up against Don Garlits in the finals at the U.S. Nationals. We didn't know it at the time, but this was a history-making moment.
It was, Dave. It would be Don Garlits' 8th and final U.S. Nationals Top Fuel victory. Again, over Darrell Gwynn. In succeeding years, some crashes, some medical problems for his Big Daddy, ultimately out of the cockpit. But this was the last time he won in Indianapolis, and relive it, folks. That's what we're going to do. Darrell Gwynn got closer than the year before, but not enough.
You have seen a bona fide 20th century miracle here today. They come from all over the country and the world, for that matter, to run at Indy. This is a racer's race and a spectator's race, and that's what makes it so great.
Great are the dreams of every racer that comes to Indianapolis Raceway Park, or even in the early days, those racetracks at places like Great Bend and Kansas City and Oklahoma City and Detroit, because those dreams lead to one thing, and that is the winner's circle at the U.S. Nationals. While Garlits may have won 8 of these U.S. Nationals titles, there are many a racer who have never, ever won, and some have only won once.
This was a tremendous Rocky story in 1974. Marvin Graham, later to be called Marvin Who Graham, from Oklahoma City, roared into Indianapolis. Most of the fellow racers didn't even know who he was, and he flat had himself an afternoon. He sawed them off one at a time through 5 rounds of competition. It was a 32-car show in those days, and this was the final as Marvin Graham picks up his only U.S. Nationals title.
His victim here, the car of our Gaines Markley, driven by Rob Bruins.
Whatever happened to Marvin Graham? Well, he went to Hollywood, actually got a few acting parts, including the movie Heart Like a Wheel, Shirley Muldowney's life story, and is now on the production side, driving high-speed camera cars.
Do you like funny cars? Do you remember the guy that won 3 Winston championships in a row? The fabled Blue Max? Well, here he was up against the Army car, Don Prudhomme in his prime. This was 1975. Prudhomme, of course, the first to ever win 4 consecutive Winston titles driving the funny car.
But the day belonged to the Blue Max crew. Raymond Beadle, Waterbed Fred, Dale Emery, that whole legendary team. That was Waterbed Fred, the cowboy hat, going absolutely nuts as they defeated Don Prudhomme in the final round. The crowd was screaming, yelling these guys on to the far end of the racetrack. Beadle, well, he was a character unlike anything we've seen before in drag racing. He taught us all how to sell T-shirts and make a little cash.
And they knew how to celebrate like no other team as Raymond Beadle defeats Don Prudhomme in the finals in 1975. They called him 240 Gordy. Why? Because he was fast.
I was lucky enough to run my first ever 5-second run there. I think we were the 3rd or 4th person running the 5s with a funny car. Set the speed record at 246 miles an hour, which was fast back then. And we ended up winning the event with my late crew chief, Jerry Verhill. So it was the best drag race of my life.
That was 1979 that Gordy was talking about as he brought the bubble-up pacemaker car out of Canada to the starting line.
And he had a bye in the final round all over the racetrack, trying to keep it off the wall of the center line was Gordy Bond. And a few years prior, his first ever U.S. Nationals, he was a runner-up.
In 1980, Top Fuel Eliminator, as so often happens, racers bring brand new cars to this event, try to sort them out. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. In the far lane, it was Terry Kapp with his brand new Wheeler Dealer car.
This was the era of the Canadians at Indianapolis. Terry Kapp from Edmonton, Alberta. Does the name Bertie Federley mean anything to you?
Really, the one that really sticks in my mind the most was the first one we won back in 1980 in dragster division with Terry Kapp and Wes Van Dusen, the guys back home from Edmonton, Alberta. Relatively unknown team. We were there. We performed well, and we won the race, and it was great. You know, the only anticlimactic that part of that race, as I recall, it was the fact that we ended up running it. Rained out on Monday. We ended up running Tuesday, and there were about 20 people in the stands, but the thrill was still the same. It was great.
And it was Jeb Allen who watched Terry Kapp win the race. Does the name Farconas, Coyle, and Minnick, that trio, mean anything? Well, it should. That's the Chi-Town Hustler team. And it was in 1982, Frank Hawley was the driver.
I can remember our first pursuit of the World Championship back when I was running my own team and Frank Hawley was driving for me. We were so broke that we were considering not being able to finish the points chase, and it turned out we beat Don Prudhomme in the final of the Bud Shootout, and that money financed the rest of that season and was largely responsible for our first win.
Not to mention that week in immigration hauled Hawley off to the slammer for lack of a work permit. We got him sprung before the final day of eliminations.
Prudhomme wishes you'd left him there as the Farconas, Coyle, and Minnick Chi-Town Hustler, in its latest configuration in 1982, won that one. Next, Jim Head, a name now synonymous with Top Fuel Racing. He was at the wheel of a funny car in '84.
I'll never forget it was very overcast skies, and it looked like it was going to rain all day. And it was going to be a serious problem if it rained that day. I'll never forget, I've got a picture of Kenny Bernstein and myself staging for the finals, and the rain clouds were coming in. And fortunately, they didn't hit us, and I won the race. Don't know how it would have turned out on Tuesday.
Bernstein went up in smoke off the starting line. Jim Head winning the title. This is Phil Hobbs. You remember Bobby Vodnik? Phil Hobbs was the partner as far as the team that owned that car, Parada and Hobbs. What happened here, Steve?
Well, he tried to run a wingless Top Fuel dragster, and it proved to be an extremely bad idea. With the throttle stuck, the car just kept hammering the guardrail on the opposite side of it. It was getting shorter and shorter. By the time it got within a few inches of his feet, fortunately, the car lost most of its anger. Now, all of this after only about 60 feet of actual acceleration. He was one lucky guy. That's the same Phil Hobbs who won the Top Gas title back in 1965. This pretty much ended a very short Top Fuel career. You want another angle? Watch this. No wing, no traction.
One of the wildest rides any U.S. Nationals has ever seen. And as you can tell, it was another one of those rainy Indy weekends, as that may have been the good fortune for Phil Hobbs. The standing water, the mud, the soft dirt, that helped absorb a great deal of the impact as this car destroyed itself in a series of gyrations. The good news out of this was that Phil Hobbs received no serious injuries.
It was also the last time anyone was tempted to run a fuel dragster without a wing. Now, with this next bit, Mac, it's a shame we don't have a soundtrack for mamas. Don't let your babies grow up to be funny car drivers. Watch Wyatt Radke, Near Lane, 1991. We have ignition. We have the lifting off of numerous parts. We have inside Wyatt Radke holding his breath, using every safety system on the car. They perform perfectly. Wyatt rides it out unhurt.
1974 Near Lane Top Fuel.
(1974) Mike Miller, Fire.
1981 Gary Bergen, Oh No!
1983, Shirley Muldowney, Big Trouble.
An early one, 1963, Jamie Parker.
1982, Billy Williams. You'll know which car it is. It ain't over yet. Now it's over. And as we say at Diamond P, and they walked away. You know, Dave, 1969. Man, were there some engine explosions. And we thought at the time maybe they were putting some additives into the fuel, like hydrazine, which is rocket fuel, or benzene, or benzodrine, or who knows what they were doing, but something was going on.
Steve, one thing we knew for sure, the end result was a lot of destroyed engines, parts, and oil laid all over the 1,320 feet of the racing surface at Indianapolis Raceway Park. What a headache.
I remember vividly 1969 when a lot of professional race teams were fooling around with a new fuel. Benzodrine, I think, was the name of it, and it was absolutely incredible. Almost every other call, every other session was a complete hand grenade job. And it got NHRA's attention to where we knew at that point we had to do something to control the fuel activity.
It also got the racers' attention. Let's remember these were front-motored cars. Absolutely frightening. Even in those days, the safety safari was right on the scene. Johnny on the spot to take care of any problems that might have existed.
If 1969 was a bad year for Top Fuel, and it was, I can recall 1990 was absolute hell on wheels for the funny cars. Let's watch. Whit Bazemore felt the heat.
We were just over our heads. We had no business being at the U.S. Nationals. That's the biggest, baddest race in the world, and to go there and be successful, you have to have all your ducks in a row, and you've got to have the best equipment money can buy.
Even though the remains look like a burned Hulk, Whit Bazemore was able to extricate himself from the race car A-OK.
1990, John Force won the Big Bud Shootout, literally in a blaze of glory. The cameraman at that position was also considering another occupation. But Forrest looped it out. He was unhurt and gave us another great interview. What about performances, Mac? How about 1961? Pete Robinson runs 8.48. So quick, no one believed it until he repeated it.
That's right. We couldn't even announce it until he did it a couple of 3 more times. In 1967, Jack Christman was driving his fabled Mercury Comet. He out-qualified his nearest opponent by more than a half a second.
In 72, Gary Beck came to Indy, a newly licensed driver. He won Top Fuel. He did it again in 73, and in 82 became the first under 5.5 seconds.
It was also 1982. Tom Anderson, using a Kenny Bernstein body, made the first ever funny car pass under 580. But right after that, Don Prudhomme laid down a 563.
Considering at the time we do this video, Pro Stock has not yet hit 200. In 1986, Warren Johnson was the first over 190. 1986, and they still haven't got 200 yet.
In 1987, Joe Amato, the first Top Fuel driver, over 280.
It's almost unbelievable what's taken place because our entry fields have gone as high as 1,000 cars running, and it's, of course, the one event of the year that every contestant would like to be included in. And so I think that all of us are just extremely proud of what's happened in the development of championship drag racing using the U.S. Nationals as the annual catalyst.
I've been attending Indy since 1963, and the race, sometimes it just boggles the mind to think about how the technology has come up over the years. I mean, we've started out from when I first started as a young boy, the times, you know, were even in the 150, 60 mile an hour in a quarter of a mile, and you see what we've gone today. We've already covered better than 300 miles an hour. You just don't know where it's going to stop.
Well, the old-timers all get there for one thing, and if they got the dollar left in their pocket, they're going to go to Indy because it is the granddaddy of all of them when you come right down to it.
Well, folks, there you have it. Our look back at the most important and certainly the largest drag race in the world, the U.S. Nationals. And Dave, we couldn't get everything in.
No, Steve, you understand that in 1 hour's time, it's very difficult to show you everything that happened at every U.S. Nationals, but we do hope you enjoyed our look back at 40 years of the greatest drag race in the world.
Maybe someday we'll do a sequel.
I hope I'm there.
Me too. Bye-bye. Want the best seat in the house for motorsports entertainment? Then Diamond P Sports is your ticket for excitement. From over 40 spectacular titles in the growing Diamond P inventory, you can build a home video library of your favorite motorsports action that you'll enjoy for years to come. For the drag racing enthusiast, Diamond P annually presents the entire NHRA Championship season in review. You get all the dramatic action as the best drivers chase the elusive NHRA Championship crowns. Beginning with Drag Racing 86, you can pick and choose from the entire library of season-long highlights. For an exciting and comprehensive look at recent drag racing history, there's Decade of Thrills and Decade of Thrills 2, examining the most chilling, agonizing, and emotion-filled moments of the 70s and 80s. Now, funny car fans can't get enough of Fabulous Floppers 1 and 2. The sound and excitement of Pro Stocks takes the stage in Hot Rods from Detroit, and Top Fuel is What's Hot in Kings of the Sport. Interested in the legends of drag racing? Diamond P fills the bill with a dynamic story of Don Prudhomme and 2 videos on the one and only Big Daddy, Garlett's The Legend and Garlett's 2, The Legend Lives On. Now, if you're a drag racing history buff, you can trace the evolution of NHRA in Gathering Speed. For those who like their racing loud and raw, don't miss Top Fuel Sensations, the sights and sounds and smell of record-breaking performance, and Challenge of Fire, the thunder and fury of side-by-side jet car racing. If it's monster trucks, mud racing, and tractor pulling that cranks you up, then Shake, Battle, and Roll and Shake, Battle, and Roll 2 are for you. For racing of the H2O variety, there's Thunderboats, a fascinating look at 200-mile-an-hour hydroplanes and the fearless men who pilot them. Sprint car fans love the unpredictable winged world of outlaws from the Knoxville Nationals. Beginning with Knoxville 87, you can get the entire collection of annual mayhem. And fasten your seatbelt for a treacherous journey as up, over, and off-road takes you from the Baja Desert to outrageous stadium racing. For two-wheel fans, the amazing aerial dogfighting called Supercross fuels the intensity for the flight to the finish. If you're a truck enthusiast, hey, you can't beat the 3-volume set entitled Truckin' Trilogy. It's all the best trucks, competition, and locales from the Truckin' USA TV series.
Want to go drag racing? Well, two-time funny car champion and drag racing instructor Frank Hawley takes you from street to strip in this informative video that explains procedures and concepts it sometimes takes years for even veteran racers to get a handle on. Diamond P Sports brings you the story of Bernie Little, the owner of Miss Budweiser, the most recognized name in racing. Mr. Unlimited recalls a career that spans 3 decades in unlimited hydroplane racing. Share the ups, downs, elation, and sorrows. Once a used car salesman, now a multi-millionaire and the owner of the most famous racing boat ever to turn a rock. If you're ready for more mud and monster trucks, you'll want the 3rd installment of Shake, Battle, and Roll. It's more of the mud racing mishaps and monster truck tribulations that Diamond P Sports fans demand. Shake, Battle, and Roll 3 is sure to satisfy the mud-thirsty monster lover in you. Out of the Everglades and the Diamond P archives, perhaps the most unusual motorsport ever, swamp buggy racing. Swamp Fever spans a decade of the most outrageous amphibious vehicles ever to cross the Sippy Hole. Swamp Fever, watch out, it's catching. And finally, to complete your library, you must include the best-selling series of And They Walked Away, volumes 1, 2, and 3. Here are the most breathtaking moments from the Diamond P archives, racing's most spectacular spins, flips, wrecks, and fires, and in each perilous incident, the driver beats the odds. To order any of these terrific videos or to receive a full-color catalog detailing all of the titles available, just call 1-800-421-0725 or write to the address in your screen. Diamond P Sports. We make motorsports come alive.